You're on mute, Laura.
Thank you. Right, I'll hit record now, then anyone else that joins us a little bit later can catch up anything that they missed at the beginning. But yes, thank you for everyone for joining today's Lunch and Learn. Lewis Keighley is kindly hosting it for us today. This is one that I've actually had quite a few requests around, so I'm looking forward to this one today around interview techniques, how the best to prepare for interviews, any like hints and tips. Obviously, Lewis is the expert in this area, so thank you so much for making the time. I know everyone's very busy. So yeah, thank you very much. I will just stay quiet, hand over to you. If you've got any question, guys, as Lewis is chatting through, just pop them in the chat at the side, and we can try and get to some of those at the end as well. But yeah, over to you, Lewis. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks everybody for joining. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Lewis. I'm part of the recruitment team. I'm also joined by my colleague, Natalie Cross. If you just want to say a quick hello, Nat.
Hi. Hi, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, so as per the introduction, today's session is a little bit about, well, we're actually going to do it in 3 sessions, which I thought is sections, which I thought was the best way to do it. Just looking at internal applications and, you know, if you get through to an interview stage, it's just some hints and tips, really. So there's no right or wrongs. We're just trying to give you a little bit of a guideline. I thought we'd just break it into 3 different sections. The first one, I was just going to go over a little bit about CV and what to put in there. The second section is a little bit about actually doing the application, and again, just some hints and tips in there, and then the actual interview, should you be lucky enough to get an interview at the end of it as well, if that sounds okay. And as Laura said, if there's any questions, just shout up or just you know, put something in the chat there, and we'll answer those as we're going along. Does that sound okay? So just a couple of things quickly about the CV. And again, like I said, these are just really quick guidelines. When you are writing a CV, make sure, and I'm sure that everybody's got a template of one that you've used, particularly when you first perhaps started with Bupa or maybe from longer ago. Just make sure it is up to date. I would say keep it quite brief. You don't want a CV to be more than, say, 2 pages long, particularly. Making sure that you've got your contact information on there as well. So just bearing in mind that this is an internal application, so letting the recruiter know how you can be contacted. So is it via Teams internally, or would you prefer us to try and call you on a mobile outside of office hours? What are those hours? Any restrictions? You know, that sort of information, really. Because what is an application if we can't get hold of you? Okay. And just start with your most recent employment history first. So the job that you're currently doing, put in as much information as you can about that, making sure that that's relevant to the actual job role that you're applying for as well. And then the rest can be, you know, your previous work experience. You can make that fairly briefish, but the main part is the most recent one that you've done, really. A lot of people ask about should they put in a little synopsis at the top about themselves, and I don't always know that that's a really massive big thing. Maybe a couple of sentences would be good, relating again to the transferable skills that you could have for that specific role that you're wanting to apply for. All the time, just making sure that that is really relevant to the skill sets that you're really wanting to promote for that role. Okay. So that's the first little bit about CV writing. Brief version, but I just wanted to just pause for a sec. First of all, Nat, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or if anybody's got any questions at this point. Is it all sounding okay to everybody? Sorry, what was that, Nat?
I think you've covered all the basics there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So you've put together your application, your CV, sorry, and you're now thinking about putting an application together. So you'll have seen something that'll have gone through on the comms that goes around, or you've researched actively Workday to see what other opportunities are available to us at the moment. You've identified a particular role that you're fairly interested in. I would always say to people, the first thing to do is maybe reach out to that particular team or manager or recruiter, if it's myself or whoever it might be, maybe just getting a bit of an overview of that team, because you really want to make sure that it is something that is going to fit in with your skill set. It is going to be that next point of your career, that next progression opportunity, making sure that it is definitely going to be something that you want to do. When you've had that overview, it'll give you a much more idea of what the skill sets they're looking for, and that will then help when you're putting together that CV and also putting your application together as well. Application questions are fairly basic on an internal application. The main questions will be something along the lines of, what are your transferable skills, or what are your motivations for wanting to do this job role? Again, you don't have to go massively overboard with the information that you put in there, just making sure that it is fairly short and sweet, and it does sort of cover off the main points of what you want to get across. So you're just trying to catch the eye of the hiring manager or the recruiter, so that they'll look at that and think, okay, this person has got what we're looking for potentially for this role. Sometimes people will do it as an extra attachment, like a covering letter, and you could do that if you wanted to as well. So short synopsis about your transferable skills, your motivation, you thinking about words that you're using as well. So as an example, if you were going for a role in sales, you might want to mention how you are target driven, you're very motivated by deadlines, those sort of terminologies. Sometimes they do ask for specific degrees, particular education, particularly if it's maybe an IT or a more specialist area. So just adding those on there as well. That was a very brief outline of the actual what to do on an application and what to think about. Again, just going to pause for a second. How's that sounding to everybody? Any questions about that?
All good here. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so you've done your CV, you submitted an application, and fingers crossed, then you get a contact from a recruiter like myself or one of my colleagues, just to let you know about the next stages. They'll always book in a short call with you, or just give you further information about the interview stage. So this is kind of what to think about when you're preparing for an interview at this point. Get as much information as you can do from the recruiter or the hiring manager. So is it just going to be an interview? Is it going to be the standard competency questions, which the majority of time for internals it is? Are there going to be any additional assessments to do? Is there a role play? Have you got to put together a presentation? That sort of thing. So you can get that information mainly from your recruiter. They'll be able to give you guidelines about what to think about if you are putting something extra together, how much time you're going to have to be able to conduct that exercise within the assessment centre. So they'll give you some guidelines on that. Ask about guidelines of, what to expect for the interview questions, how you can prepare yourself. So as I just mentioned, a majority of the ones internally are competency-based questions. So that's thinking about your examples. So giving examples of your transferable skills. That's the bit where you can really sell yourselves as well. You probably all heard about using the STAR method. So STAR is just thinking about your examples and how to structure them in a really cohesive way. So thinking about the situation that you want to talk about, the tasks that you had to do for that particular scenario, the actions, and also the final results. So an overall example there. I would also mention about maybe not over preparing too much. So sometimes you can get yourself all knotted up in your head. You can really over prepare, and that loses a bit of your personality sometimes if it comes across. You don't want to be sounding like you're reading off a script or anything like that. It does need to be quite personable when you're in the interview. That brings me on to the final thing that I was going to mention as well, is about taking notes. I think that it's really good to write things down. A lot of people sometimes say to me, can I take my notes into the interview with me? Again, there's no big rules about that. There's no do's or don'ts. What I would say is, if you are taking in notes there, you don't want them to distract you. So you can maybe have them to a side, but you don't want to be fumbling around with bits of paper looking for your examples, because that'll put you off track, and that'll take your eye off the interaction that you'll have with that hiring manager when you're doing your interview. I know it can be really anxious and people get really nervous, and you need to use that in a bit more of a positive way sometimes. Just thinking that if you are getting really nervous, it does show that you really want that. So it can be a positive thing as well. So the notes, they can be there as a little bit of a help. Maybe you can refer to them at the end when you've done your main questions. The managers will ask if you've got any questions for them. Sometimes you can refer to those notes there if you just jotted a few things down, and that'll just jog your memory of anything that you want to ask them, really. Again, I can't think of anything else to add on there. Have I missed anything else off that you normally go through, Nat, with candidates?
I think the one thing for me for internal interviews is just pretend it is an external one, because it's really easy to assume that the manager knows what you're talking about, and because you think they work for Bupa, they'll know certain things that happen internally, but they have to base it off the information you give them. So pretend they have no clue what you're talking about or what you do, and just make sure you go into all the detail that you would do as if it was an external one.
Yeah, it's a really good point, that. So sort of like maybe avoid using any sort of jargon. You know what we're like here in Bupa, we use a lot of letters for different things, maybe just re-explaining exactly what you mean by that as well. So it's a really good point. Thanks, Nat. Okay, so those are the main pointers that I wanted to go over. We've still got a good sort of 10-15 minutes left, so I just wanted to hand over to you guys, really, and just now you've got myself and Natalie on the call, fire any questions at us or anything that you want us to maybe just recap over or just go over with you.
I mean, that was a good summary what you've said, really, because I've been through the process a number of times now already.
Yep.
And it is as you've said. I mean, some of the things I've obviously, some of the things that they tend to ask are things like, tell me about a time when you've gone above and beyond.
Yep.
Tell me about a time when you've learned something new. Tell me about a time when you've done something difficult. These are all standard Bupa questions. And
Yes.
my last interview, I had really good feedback on the back of it.
Good.
There was just one question I didn't get benchmark on, which is, I'm still disappointed by that. But the other two were absolutely fine. It's just that tell me about time when you've learned something new, which is a really tough one, that one.
Yeah, and you are right as well with a couple of things that you've said there, Gary, actually. So just thinking about our Bupa values, because a lot of the questions will link into, the values that we've got about being caring, etc. And also, if you do have an interview and it's not successful, try not to be too disheartened and always contact that hiring manager like you've done as well, Gary, booking the feedback sessions, because that'll really, really help for the next time. And just thinking sometimes, especially internally, it can be really tough. Sometimes you have to have one or two interviews before you actually get that next sort of stage, that next position.
I mean, like I said, that last interview, it went really, really well.
Yeah.
They were very impressed with me. It was just that third question about learning something new that got me. But it was better than the ones before. So
yeah,
I'm not
great
every
time.
I'm not great with interviews, but the more you do them, I guess the better you get.
Yeah, you are right as well. And sometimes you just said something there as well, Gary, saying I'm not great with interviews. Sometimes you have to get that out of your head a little bit and think, okay, I am going to be quite good. You don't want to go in there too arrogant, but you do want to go in there with a little bit of confidence as well. So it's just sometimes it's a little bit of a mindset, isn't it? Just getting into that sort of thing, thinking, right, I think I know what I'm talking about, and you kind of know a half of what to expect a little bit as well. So it just comes with practice.
And I have my notes as well, which was it worked absolutely fine.
You did it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, what I've said as well today is all guidelines. There's no rights or wrongs. It's just some little hints and tips that I've given people over the years that have helped a little bit sometimes. And just from my own experience with the notes, for example, I have been in interviews where people have just ended up with paper everywhere and it's just gone, completely wrong because of that. The notes have hindered them, but it can help a little bit as well. James, did you have a question?
Hi, yeah.
Hiya.
So I just thank you for all that. Very, very helpful. Also coming off the back of 2 unsuccessful interviews internally, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now
I'm always guilty of all these as well, aren't I? Giving you bad news sometimes.
So something that's not it's a scenario that is not going to apply to everyone, but so what additional support can be provided for interviews for those who are neurodivergent? And like what are we allowed to ask for in terms of support? Because I'm nearly
Yeah.
diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm still sort of discovering what I can and can't do, and all sorts, and sort of reasonable requests to allow sort of like a not an advantage, but fairness, really, in essence.
Yeah, so it's something that you'd need to discuss on a one-to-one basis with a recruiter or a hiring manager, whoever is contacting you directly. Normally the recruiter, really. And you just need to let them know what you might need. So is it a specific area that you want to be in? Do you want to make sure that you're doing it face to face is easier for you, or is it better via Teams like we're doing today? People have, even though you might have similar conditions, everybody's got slightly different requirements. So just liaise with the person that's arranging the interview for you. If you are doing those additional tasks as well, so if you are preparing for a presentation, or you're doing a role play and you need a bit of extra time to read through a brief or that sort of thing, we can make allowances for that. So just be open and honest and ask, really.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm similar in position. I've gone for interview and not back. I've got to interview stage. I've hit benchmark
right
a couple of times, and this is like where I'm sort of really struggling. Is I've lost my points, and it is people scoring higher than me in is there anything that I can do that is going to sort of like boost my appealability to the roles? I mean, it's a little bit frustrating because I'm not sure
just the word I was going to use.
Yeah.
No. Look, I do understand it is difficult sometimes with internal jobs, particularly, again, depends on what sort of teams you're thinking of and what jobs they are. But a lot of the time it is just one position is available. A lot of the time, several people will apply for that same position. So the criteria has to be the same for everybody, just so that we've got consistency and we're being fairness and everything. Everybody has to be scored the same, which is why a lot of the interviews you will think are being quite similar, even though the questions are slightly tweaked, but they do have the same sort of steps, really, so that we can mark everybody that's the same. I understand your frustration there, because it is really difficult, and sometimes it's difficult as recruiters for us to give that feedback where we're saying you did really well, you did pass the benchmark, however one other person just had that slight edge on you, they just scored a little bit higher, so they're offered the position. You can tell I said that quite a many times, and it does happen, and I do understand that's a frustration. As to say, what can you personally do more? It sounds like from what you've just said that you are pretty much, you do know what you're sort of doing and saying. It is just nobody knows what the competition is going to be like when you're applying for a job, especially when there's several different people as well. It sounds like you're on the right track there. Just thinking about the way that you're preparing, the overview, maybe that might just give you that little bit of an edge that you might have of people, and just being as when you're having the time with a team member or the manager, just asking as many questions as you can do and trying to just incorporate those in the answers. Been a bit vague there, really, haven't I? But I think that those are the main sort of things. Each role is quite individual as well, so it's a bit of a difficult one to answer. But I've just tried to give you a bit of hints and tips there, if that helps.
Yeah, I've been doing the overviews, and I've always requested feedback, and I've been trying to apply it all. But it's like I say, it's when you benchmark, it's knowing about sort of what's going to get you those extra points. And I read through the descriptions and the job descriptions, do the overviews and everything else, prepare and do everything I think I can think of. But so that was just where I'm hitting a bit of a roadblock at the moment. But
I understand, and please try it. And if it refers to anybody else that's on this call has got a similar situation as well, because I know it happens quite a lot, I would just try to say, try not to be too disheartened by it. Keep trying, because when the role comes up that is right for you, everything will click and fall into place, and you will be successful, and you will eventually be able to progress and to build that sort of extra layer of the career and your experience that you're looking for as well. But again, I just keep saying this, but I do understand your frustration there as well.
Thank you.
I can't see if anybody else has got anything. I've just seen your message, Roberta, so I'm just reading it now real quickly. There's one more position you feel like applying. There's no rules about how many positions that you do apply for. I would personally say, if you can, do one at once, because if you do apply for 2 or 3 different positions and they all start coming back to you around the same sort of time, I wouldn't want people to get confused over which one's which and that sort of thing. I know that sometimes the positions are only available for a short window. 10 working days is the minimum that we have to advertise a role for, unless there's other exceptions around that. But if you do need a bit more time to apply, you can always ask for that little bit of extra time. But there's definitely no rules or anything like that about applying for more than one position. Just don't get yourself mixed up with which ones are which. Again, hope that kind of answers that for you. Got a thumbs up, so I'm presuming that's good. Still got a few minutes. I just wondered if there's anything else from anybody. Anything you can add to that, Nat? Any other circumstances that you've kind of seen at all?
I think so. I was trying to think of everything else you were saying.
I think that's it then. Thank you.
Fine.
No more questions, but thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. Thank you everyone else that's been on the call as well, been engaging and asking the questions. That makes it much more interesting session. So thank you. Thank you very much for all your time.
Hope it's been useful. Thanks everybody.
It's been really good. Thanks, Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Lewis.
you. Bye.
Bye.
See
Take
ya.
care, everyone. Bye.